Welcome to the very first official episode of Walk Through. I'm Janina, and I'm so excited you're here. This podcast is about finding God in the valleys of life and walking through them with faith and hope. To kick off this journey, I'm joined by my co-host and my amazing friend, Kiley, who has an incredible story to share, from trusting God's timing to so many unexpected things that she's faced with her family. And her journey is a powerful example of walking through the valley with a whole lot of faith. So, Kiley, welcome officially as our first guest.
I'm so glad we're doing this.
I know it has definitely been long overdue, and I'm excited to hear your story because although I know probably most of your story just from walking alongside of you as your friend, I know that there's probably a lot of things that you probably even just kept to yourself because you didn't think that you could share that with other people, or things that you've gone through, or words that God has given you. And so I'm excited to learn even more about it. So let's just start off with your story. Who are you? And just tell a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Kiley. Janina and I met, has it been 10 years already? Almost 10 years ago. I live here in Tennessee with my husband, Ryan, and our 14-year-old daughter, and grew up in most of my life, grew up in California, surrounded by family and friends. And now we're all kind of just spread across the country. Yeah, I grew up in the church. We've always been really strong in our faith. And I'm 43 years old, almost 43 years old. And I've got lots of different stories, as I'm sure anybody else would at my age. And God has just proven his faithfulness and his goodness time and time again. So,
yeah, I love that. And I think the older that we get, the more that we see how he has been in like every situation, even when we maybe didn't see it or feel it at that time. So it's really cool looking back. Yeah. So let me ask you this. What is the reason that you decided to move from California to Tennessee, or how did that kind of come about?
So the journey to Tennessee was pretty much like 10 years in the making.
Since you met me, because I'm in Tennessee, so
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, it started when Reese was little. So just a little more background. I was born in Nebraska, and then my family moved to California, and then we moved to Montana when I was in first grade. So we were there for, I think, a year and a half. And then we moved back to California, and that's where I had been until we moved here. But when Reese was younger, when she was probably 2 or 3 years old, we started to really have the desire to move out of California just so that we could give her not necessarily a better life, but a different life. Because where we were in California, it wasn't safe for her to play outside. We were constantly monitoring stuff that was going on around the city. And so we really had a desire to move somewhere where we could have, open spaces, a slower pace, just to give her those different experiences that it's weird to say a different experience than I had when I was a kid, or similar to what I had as a kid, because I didn't grow up in the country necessarily, but I just feel like times were so different back then. Mm-hmm. And maybe things were very similar to what they are now. We just know more about it because of social media. But, I spent most of my time playing outside with my sister and going to friends' houses. We didn't have video games, and I mean, we had Nintendo, but, there was just a lot of stuff that we didn't know. There was a lot of stuff that kids have access to now that I didn't even have till I, graduated high school. So we ultimately wanted something different for her. And we started with the idea of moving to Idaho because we knew that my parents were going to be retiring there. And we figured if we were going to move out of state, we should probably go somewhere where we know family or have friends. And at that time, we just were not in a position to really financially be able to do anything. and eventually got priced out of it. Then we moved, or sorry, we didn't move, obviously. I guess we moved on to the idea of moving to Montana because that has always felt like home for me just because of, the memories and the family members that I have over there. And of course, the show Yellowstone comes out and we get priced out of that. So, so we kind of let things go, but we still had that desire and we prayed about it. And, every night we would say prayers, with Reese before bed, and always on our list was, God, just open those doors for us. If you want us to make any kind of move, and just allow it to happen. And over the years, we had friends move out of state, and I was always curious to hear their stories about how it happened for them. And every single one of them just said, the doors opened and things just went really naturally. And while I was so excited for them, I kept wondering, like, why is it not happening for us? So fast forward to 2020, the year that everybody is just so fond of reminiscing over. In September, I started dealing with some pretty regular headaches that were always in the same spot, and no medicine, nothing I did was touching it. And I had to kind of think outside the box. And because I've grown up with headaches, this, I've struggled with migraines and headaches for a really long time.
Yeah.
And before, when I would take ibuprofen, it would knock them out and I would be fine. But these ones they just would not go away. And so I started thinking, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I went from working partly from home to full-time from home, sitting in front of a computer. Maybe it's eye strain, maybe it's muscle tension, maybe it's stress. So I started going to the chiropractor. I went to the eye doctor. I got a new chair for my office. Like, I was doing everything I could think of to try to get these things to go away. And nothing really worked. So I eventually made a call to my doctor, and she said, okay, let's do some blood work to just make sure there's nothing inflammatory going on. We'll do an MRI and make sure everything structurally is okay. And I said, fine. I've had MRIs before and nothing has ever shown up. So I was just kind of going with the flow. And on November 19th was my first MRI scan. And I think it was the next day. It might have even been the same night. I honestly can't remember. But my doctor called me and she said, okay, they found a mass in your left frontal lobe, and it's about 1.2 centimeters. And they want you to have an MRI with and without contrast so that they know what it is that they're dealing with. She said it is consistent with what they call a meningioma, which is often a benign brain tumor. Usually they're not cancerous. And so I'm getting this call as we're in our bedroom. Ryan is taking a nap in the bed next to me. And I'm just like, I think I was watching TV or something. And so I get this phone call. And as soon as she says they found a mass, I like grabbed his arm and he just woke up like, what's happening? And I started tearing up and told him what was going on. And so anyway, had the MRI with the with and without contrast, and it confirmed this is what we're dealing with. So I see the neurosurgeon in December, and I'm at this appointment by myself. And the appointment where I met her, because it was her office was in a hospital. So during COVID, like, you couldn't have anybody with you. It was just the person for the appointment. Yeah. And I'm sitting there, and I want to say she was close to 2 hours late for the appointment. So I'm literally sitting in this room, of course I know that I have this tumor, but I don't know what she's going to say. I don't know anything at this point. And so I'm sitting there by myself, and she comes in and she kind of rushes it. I think she was in surgery or something. But anyway, she the first thing she says was, okay, we can have surgery. It's small enough. It's in a easy, spot to get out. It was literally sitting just right on top of my brain. And, she says it doesn't look like it's attached to anything really. So, we could do that. It's also very reasonable for you to wait 6 months and do another scan and see, if there's been any growth, because what she told me with meningiomas is that they don't grow linearly. So they could be the same size for years and then have a weird growth spurt, or they could grow consistently and then stop. So you just never know how they're going to react. So
Wow.
I talked to Ryan, and the only two people that we have known that have gone through brain surgery did not come out of it the same. And their brain surgeries were for different matters. They both had glioblastomas. The tumors were larger and a harder to get spot in the brain, but that was the only thing we knew. And so we decided to wait. And for 6 months, almost every single day, I was thinking about it. What's going on? What is it doing? How is it growing? Every time I had a headache, my mind would just start spinning. And I was praying constantly, like, okay, God, just take this away from me. Just let it miraculously disappear from the MRIs, because I've heard about that happening before. And just pray, pray, pray. And so 6 months later, I have my scan, and I meet with the doctor on the day of our 15th wedding anniversary, which is, yay.
Wow.
The doctor walks in, and the first thing she says is, okay, I see that there's been some growth. And my heart shattered.
Yeah.
And thankfully, my mom was with me because Ryan couldn't make it to that appointment. So while I'm going through scenarios in my head, she's asking all of the questions, and the doctor said, no, we can still have surgery. It's still small enough to get out fairly easily. We could also do radiation, but there's side effects with that. And it's not 100% guarantee that, it would be taken care of completely. And I said, okay, if I decided not to do anything, when would you recommend my next scan be? And she said 3 months. So she didn't tell me directly, but I could tell that it was concerning enough for her to want to monitor it more closely, because it had already grown so much in, that 6 month period. So Ryan and I went away for our anniversary. We talked about it that weekend, and we came to the conclusion that, it wasn't a matter of if I should have the surgery, but when. Because we obviously wanted to do it when it was easy enough to get out and not wait too long to where it would start attaching to things and get harder to remove. So I was set up for surgery. I think it was like 2 weeks. Like it happened really fast. And I had never had surgery before. I had never even been under anesthesia. And I thought one of the funny things, so Ryan's whole thing has always been go big or go home. So I was like, okay.
Well,
just
going from no surgery ever to having brain surgery, that's got to be like terrifying.
Yeah. Why? I got into the pre-op room again. Ryan couldn't be in there with me. And the nurse, I remember she was checking my vitals, and she said, you must be really nervous. I said, well, yeah, I mean, this was kind of a big deal. She says, your heart rate is as fast as a child's.
My
like,
goodness.
well, yeah. So one of the things that was comforting to me was my sister-in-law worked at the hospital where I had my surgery, and a friend of hers was actually a nurse who scrubbed in on my surgery.
Aww.
So she came into the pre-op room, and she said, oh, I'm Jennifer's friend. I'm going to be in your surgery today. So that kind of put me at ease a little bit. My surgeon came in, and she answered any last minute questions. And I asked her to kind of track the size of the tumor from when we found it to what it is now. And she said it had basically grown from the size of like a pencil eraser to a grate.
Wow.
And that was in a 6-month period. So she says, we're doing the right thing. We're making the right decision. So,
wow.
So the anesthesiologist gives me my little cocktail, and I don't even remember making it out of the pre-op room. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in recovery, and Ryan's on my right and the doctor's on the left. She said she got it out, and we found out the pathology showed that it was a grade 1 benign meningioma, which is pretty much like best case scenario. She actually said if she were to have anything, that's what she would want. So in my thinking, it was, while, I mean, it took me a little while to process this, but hindsight is always 2020. So when you're thinking about the process of things, I remember praying for God to take this away from me. And while it didn't happen in a way that I had imagined, he still took it away from me by putting me in the right place with the right doctors and the right hospital and the right insurance, and I don't know if you remember me writing about this, but I remember that parable of the neighborhood that flooded, and the guy was sitting on top of his roof, and people were coming by to try to help him, and he kept saying, "Oh no, thanks, God's going to take care of me. God's going to take care of me." And he eventually drowns. And when he goes to heaven, he says, "God, what happened? Why didn't you save me?" And he says, "Well, I sent the boat, and I sent the helicopter, and I sent these other people, but so I just felt like all of those things were God's way of rescuing me and taking me out of that situation.
Yeah.
So going back, I promise this ties into our move to Tennessee. We had scheduled a trip to visit Tennessee because our nieces had moved here and bought houses. And so it was just going to be a visit to see them. And so we came in August, so 2 months after my surgery, and we were here for 10 days, and we were able to just kind of drive around, and we just fell in love with the area. And so that started Tennessee being on our radar of possible places to move. So in February, we came back for just like a weekend trip because it was my birthday. And our niece told Ryan that there had been a posting in the city that had been open for a year, and it was for an electrical inspector. And he was an electrician in California, but he knew that it wasn't a job that he could necessarily retire in because it was so hard on his body. And, this would have been a job that would allow him freedom from that, but, also give him good benefits, good retirement. And so he found out what certifications he would need. He took the test, he got certified, he interviewed in March, and we put the house up for sale in April, and we were here in June.
So like once it happened, it happened.
Yes. And
it spiraled.
And I remember, and this is a weird piece of information, but I remember he was in the shower one day and we were talking about it over the shower curtain, and he's like, "Yeah, so I let's contact this person. Let's get our house up for sale." And I said, wait a second, because we have been talking about this for like 8 years, 9 years at this time. Why now? He says, "I don't know. I just feel like it's a God thing. Like it's just, things are falling into place." And it was then what I thought back of all of my other friends who had moved. It's like, okay, I get it. So I always think about how we had been praying for these things for so long. And it's like, I genuinely believe that God wants to give us the desires of our hearts.
Yeah.
But his timing is perfect. So it's like, if we had forced a move before my diagnosis or my surgery, who knows how that would have worked out.
A different doctor on a different day could have had a different outcome,
Yes. So, and honestly, the doctor that I originally had asked my primary, I was like, "Is there anybody else that I can see?" Because I didn't really like where her office was, and she kind of rushed me in my appointment, and my physician, she was like, she's the best one around. And so I gave it another go, and she had actually moved offices, and it was such a different experience from that very first appointment I had. And she actually, when we had decided to have the surgery, she opened up an hour before she started taking other patients just so she could go down my list of questions.
Wow, that's awesome.
She was fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite a whirlwind. And I will say a funny tidbit. I don't know if you've ever had an MRI, but there is a there's a series or sequence of sounds, and it's very repetitious, but they're all different. And it was during those MRIs that I felt and my MRIs were, 30, 45 minutes just because of everything that they needed to do. And I would always be praying during them, but I would pray in the pattern, like, Lord, take this away from me. Lord, take this.
In the pad,
And I
yeah.
would like pray. Yeah, but I would like, as people came to my mind, I would start praying for other people. And so it's kind of odd that I met God in the MRI machines
Yeah.
pretty frequently.
That's so cool though. And I think it's interesting hearing your perspective on this now, because I think when you were going through it and we were having conversations about it, I just remember at that time when you were sharing, I never once doubted. I never once was worried that something bad would happen, or like Kiley's not going to be okay, or what if this happens or what if that happens. Somehow it was like God just told me she's fine. She's going to be okay. And so I don't remember ever having a moment of fear when it comes to that. And I don't know if it was just because of you were talking to me or if this is how you were feeling in the moment, but I don't remember a lot of like, it didn't seem like fear was overwhelming for you in those moments. And I could be wrong, maybe you just like covered it really well. But I just remember, obviously, there were concerns and there were questions and there was wondering, but I don't remember a paralyzing fear to hit you.
Yeah, I definitely remember being very anxious about it, but I don't think I allowed it to control me. And I think I remember we had talked maybe a day or two before the surgery, and I remember you said something to me, because one of my biggest concerns was the left frontal lobe is where your personality is and stuff. And so I was afraid that I wasn't going to be me afterwards. And I remember telling you that I also had viral meningitis in 2008, and I was hospitalized for like 9 days with that. And you had said, I don't even know if you remember this, but you're like, it's no wonder why Satan keeps trying to attack that part of you, because you're just such a unique and kind person, and he doesn't want good things for you. And I just remember thinking like, yeah, you're right. And if that's what he's trying to do, then I know that God's going to bring me out of this. Okay. And when we told Reese about this, she knew that I had a tumor and we were monitoring it. But when we told her that I needed to have surgery, she was like, okay. I said, do you have any questions? She says, no, God's going to take care of you. You'll be okay. So
That's so
I think
sweet.
I think it was just, I had such an amazing support system around me that I don't think people were letting me sit in it and be afraid. Like they would talk me through the fear. They would talk me through the worry. And I'm sure my parents were beside themselves, even though they didn't show it to me in that moment. But
Yeah.
it was definitely a scary time. But
And I
yeah,
think about how beautiful that timing is, even having that community around you. Because if it would have been after you moved, you may not have had that immediate community. Or even if it would have been years before you had a solid community, it may have been a little bit harder. And so just like God's faithfulness in bringing people around you that like, it's like even if he didn't audibly speak to you, he put people around you that like spoke his truth into your life and that gave you peace. Like even Reese,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And my mom, she was at church one night and there was a song that she just, I guess, started weeping to. And it was, honestly, I can't remember what it was. She can tell you, but it had something to do with like, having an army behind you. And she's like, they sang this and I just immediately thought of you. And this was God's way of telling me that you were going to be okay.
Yeah.
And she had also told me, because she was in the waiting room with Ryan and his mom, and she was praying for the angels to surround me. And she says at that exact moment when she said that prayer, she saw this really super hugely tall nurse walking around the waiting room. She's like, hello, God, is
Oh,
that what a partners is? So yeah, there was just a lot of blessings in that. And there's times when like after the surgery, because when I was diagnosed with this, one of the first things people do these days is join Facebook groups so that you can, talk with other people who are going through the same thing. There are so many people who are dealing with these things on a daily basis, and their symptoms are just I I almost like feel guilty that I had it so easy, or I don't know if
mhm.
that's the right, if I want to say it that way, because I don't want to diminish anything that anybody else is going through. But I'm like, why was I, so lucky with what I got versus this
Yeah.
other person who's just dealing with all of this struggle? And there are a lot of people that have said they don't really have much of a support system, or people are downplaying it like it's not a big deal for them. And I just felt like I had such an opposite experience because I did have so much support. I knew that people knew that I was scared, and they walked me through it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I would encourage anybody who is going through that to just pray about it and pray that God would send you the right people that you need, because it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. That was what I was going to ask you is if somebody that's listening is going through something similar, or whether it's brain surgery or a different like health issue or
Mhm.
something that they're dealing with, what would you say to them to kind of like help them navigate through this season?
I would remind them that God's timing is everything. And even though there are certain things that happen to us that we cannot understand, is walking with us. And if you don't have somebody in your immediate support that can offer that kind of guidance and support to you, just keep praying that God will show you where you do have support. I think sometimes people are so focused on what they can see and what they have right in that moment that they forget to look to the side and think like, oh, you know what, this thing happened over here, or I do have this person over here. And it's hard to like focus on multiple things
Mm-hmm.
and not just focus on what you don't have.
Yeah.
Prayer is huge. Yeah. I would say, if you can, if somebody is going through something, there is almost 100% of the time, there is somebody else who has gone through something very
Yeah.
similar. So the Facebook groups, sometimes they're great for finding people like that where you can connect with them. Obviously, it's social media. So, there might not always be that thing, but like, even if you just go to a prayer group at church or try to find people that can sit with you, just, you got to try to seek it out.
Yeah, I think if I can say, like, you hit it right there, like, you have to seek it out because especially when you're going through something, it's really easy. Like, the enemy will just put it in your mind, like, you're alone. Nobody's there for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're the only one that's ever dealt with this. Like, this is just
Mm-hmm.
you. And so it's so important to, like, let people know if you're scared. Let people know if you're hurting. Let
Mm-hmm.
people know if there's something going on because I know for me, when I've gone through things, I just kind of assumed people knew how I was feeling and
Yeah.
just like blame shifted, like, well, nobody's here for me as I'm going through the
Mm-hmm.
situation,
Mm-hmm.
but really nobody knew that I needed somebody. And so
Yeah.
it's important
Yeah.
to like reach out to that community and ask God. Like literally, you can just ask Him and say, who is it that you've placed in my life that I need to reach out to about this? Like, and if you don't have anybody, pray that God would bring those people into your life because He's definitely faithful to answer that.
Yeah. Well, and I remember that when I shared my story, there were a couple of people that responded and said, "Oh my gosh, I had something similar." And oddly enough, one of my neighbors now, she had a meningioma removed, not in the same location as mine, but it was literally like we were within months of each other of having this. And
Wow.
so I found out, and we were just able to connect. So you never know unless you do share it. And then, because I think sometimes people are reluctant to share their stories because they don't want to, maybe they don't want to bring attention to themselves, or it's something that's a little bit like they I don't know if they feel like they want to just deal with it by themselves. But I think once you share your story, you're bound to have people that will come out and be like, hey, yeah, I dealt with that too. And it was really scary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the other thing to remember too is if something is happening in your life that you feel is so overwhelming to you, but you compare it to somebody else's story, still don't let that make you feel afraid to share your story, because even though it may be different from somebody else's, it's still significant for you. So don't downplay what it is that you're going through just because you feel like somebody else has it worse, because
Yes. Yeah.
it's still affecting you and your life. And
Yeah.
you need to be able to have people that are going to support you through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your
Yeah.
story. And it just makes me like that much more excited for us to do this together, because that truly is what it's all about. Like, to share our
Mhm.
stories and give people hope, and to show people that they're not alone and they have other people that are walking through this journey. It's like, yes, the Lord is so faithful in walking through this life with us, but He's given us this community and He's given us each
Yeah.
other to do this with too. So that's definitely such a powerful thing. And you have such a great testimony of faith and perseverance. And literally, I guess what I said back in 2020, which I don't remember, but it's true. The enemy is going to try to attack the parts of us that God has the biggest purpose in. So just, to stay encouraged in that. So thank you so much. And I just want to encourage anyone who is listening to that, if you're walking through this kind of valley or any kind of valley, I just really hope that Kiley's story encourages you and reminds you that you're not alone and God is with you. We're here with you. And I hope that you have more community that is here with you as well. And if this episode does encourage you, we just want to ask you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody else who you think may need to hear this, because there just are so many people, and we're going to have so many more stories to come that I know people can be encouraged by. And we're definitely honored that God would put this podcast on our hearts where we can share these things with you and be a light in the world in this way.